Hey traders, Raghee here, and in this recap, let's talk about the power, the edge in the weakest currency. Now, Friday, I talked quite a bit about the currency day trading, and today was another really good example of just rebalancing. I think is probably a big part of this end of month, end of quarter rebalancing. So we're seeing some disconnects between the movement in the equities markets and the equity indices versus the yen. The yen's wasn't enormously strong, but on a relative performance basis, both the yen and the US dollar were strong relative to mostly the Canadian dollar and the yen. So Canadian dollar was by far the weakest. Let me show you what I mean here. Let's pull this up on FinViz. So you'll see here, and this is kind of late in the day, but the Canadian dollar, regardless of what's been happening at the left side, strong side of the one-day relative performance, the one thing that's been pretty consistent is the Canadian dollar pinned to the right side, the weak side of this relative performance, which made it a whole lot easier to consider for shorts against pretty much anything, but tactically against the yen and the US dollar. Now I'll focus on the US dollar here, because a cool thing about when the US dollar is in play from a currency standpoint on the Forex side is that it opens the door to futures currency day trading, meaning you could trade the 6C. You could trade, of course, dollar Canada Forex, but you could also trade the FXC ETF as well. And mostly what we focused on was the fact that, yes, there's this disconnect between the yen and the equity markets. Even the Canadian dollar weakness was sort of juxtaposed by Australian dollar strength. I mean, you start seeing these commodity dollars on opposite ends of the one-day relative performance spectrum. You've just got a strange day. And then you say to yourself, well, it's the final days of the quarter and it's the final days of the month, and that rebalancing and paying distributions, the whole thing really does lend itself more predictably, or at least not surprisingly, to disconnects between what are very reliable market structures, market relationships. So what do we wake up to? Buy dollars, sell Canadian dollar. And that's really, I think, really good structure here. What else do we wake up to? Again, buy yen, sell Canadian dollars. And that's really, to me, it was a pretty inactive day, but let me mention this. When I have a disconnect, there's really three things that we can do. And let me share with you the notes that I shared with members here. Just give me a sec. All right, so here are the notes. And I share these notes with members on a regular basis. So let's take a look here. So when we have the yen and the indices at odds, you'll see there's just a few things we can do. One is acknowledge but ignore, right? That there's a disconnect between the indices and the yen. And I'll just trade what I see, which was pretty much long. If you've been following me talking about index futures day trading, it was pretty much long since we had a nice double test of the zero of my V-score. And we were above the three lines of the VWAP and plotting mostly green grab candles all day long. Pretty easy to be bullish most of the day. But I didn't like that trade really all that much. Not that I'm going to necessarily fade it, but I'm going to acknowledge that the yen's doing one thing, indices are doing another. The other thing was the second choice, which is just go ahead and trade Canadian dollar, Japanese yen, or at the time it was even euro yen and dollar yen. These are things that we could have done. Canadian dollar, Japanese yen was my favorite, as I mentioned, because Canadian dollar was so weak. And the third choice is to be nothing. And my combination was basically number 2 and number 3. In other words, focus on the currencies, because if there's anything that's tougher to manipulate, it's currencies relative to indices. And then if I have just, again, screaming weakness from a single currency like we did today, the Canadian dollar, then I'll focus on that. I'll focus on the extreme strength versus the extreme weakness. And that was mostly buy yen, short Canada, buy US dollar, short Canada. So check that out. Try that the next time you see the disconnect. And also remember that in the very end of the month, and especially into the quarter, that disconnect is not going to be unusual. Don't let it surprise you. Have a game plan. That was ours today. And I'll see you in the next update.